The strangest thing about the night I almost disappeared was that nobody knew I was gone. The rain had started sometime after 9, turning the city into a blur of red taillights and silver reflections. By midnight, every inch of my coat was soaked through. Cold water clung to my skin. My sneakers squished against the wet concrete every time I moved my feet. Not that I was going anywhere. I sat alone on a cracked plastic bench inside the downtown bus station, staring at the arrival board as letters flickered and shifted above me. Buses came. Buses left. People hugged goodbye. Families loaded suitcases. College students laughed too loudly. Life kept moving around me. Nobody noticed the woman sitting in the corner pretending she was fine. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 27 years old. And for the first time in my life, I was too tired to keep pretending. The paper coffee cup in my hands had gone cold over an hour ago. I still held it because it gave me something to do. Something to focus on besides the ache in my chest. Not the kind of ache doctors worry about. The kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. 6 months earlier, I had lost my apartment after my landlord raised the rent. 3 months later, the man I thought I would marry decided I was too complicated for the future he wanted. 2 weeks ago, the library where I worked cut staff hours. Suddenly, I was working part-time with full-time bills. The math never worked. No matter how many times I ran the numbers. I pulled my phone from my pocket and looked at the screen. No missed calls. No messages. No one checking if I got home safely. No one wondering where I was. A sad smile touched my lips. Funny how loneliness doesn't arrive all at once. It sneaks in quietly. One unanswered text at a time. One empty holiday at a time. One broken promise after another. Until one day you look around and realize you're standing completely alone. The station doors opened. A gust of cold wind swept through the building. I wrapped my arms around myself and closed my eyes. Just for a second. Just long enough to rest. That's what I told myself anyway. But the exhaustion living inside me wasn't normal tiredness. It was deeper than that. It lived in my bones, my muscles, my thoughts. The overhead announcements blurred together. Voices became distant echoes. The bright fluorescent lights above me stretched into soft halos. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. A bus engine rumbled. A suitcase rolled across tile floors. The sounds drifted farther and farther away. I looked down at my phone one last time. My thumb hovered over a contact that had never left my favorites list. Ethan Moretti. I stared at the name for several long seconds. Then I locked the screen and slipped the phone back into my pocket. He wouldn't want that call. Besides, people like Ethan lived in a different universe from people like me. The last thing I remember was watching rain slide down the station windows. Then everything went dark. And somewhere beyond the storm, a black SUV slowed as the most powerful man in the city noticed a woman he never expected to see sitting alone. The first thing I became aware of was warmth. Not the artificial heat of a bus station. Not the damp chill that had settled into my bones for hours. Real warmth. Soft. Steady. Safe. It wrapped around me like a blanket I had forgotten existed. Then came the sound. A low mechanical hum. Smooth. Consistent. Nothing like the rattling city buses I was used to hearing every day. My eyelids felt heavy. I tried to open them, but exhaustion pulled me back under. Somewhere nearby, a man's voice spoke quietly. Calm. Controlled. I could not make out the words. The sensation drifted away before I could hold on to it. Later, I would learn what happened after everything went dark. Ethan Moretti had been returning from a late meeting on the other side of the city. His convoy had been moving through downtown streets slick with rain. 3 black SUVs. Tinted windows. Professional drivers. The kind of presence that made traffic instinctively move aside. None of that was unusual. What was unusual was that Ethan had suddenly told his driver to stop. According to the people who worked for him, he rarely changed plans. He rarely acted on impulse. He was a man who controlled every detail of his life. But that night, he looked through a rain-streaked window and saw a woman sitting alone on a bench inside a nearly empty bus station. Me. Nobody knew why he noticed. The station was full of people coming and going. Yet somehow his eyes found me. Maybe it was the way I had slumped against the wall. Maybe it was the fact that I looked like I had nowhere else to go. Or maybe fate had simply grown tired of ignoring both of us. The convoy stopped. Security personnel exchanged confused looks. Ethan stepped out into the rain. Expensive shoes splashed through puddles. Cold wind tugged at the collar of his dark overcoat. He walked into the station alone. No dramatic entrance. No attention-seeking display of power. Just a man moving towards something he could not explain. By then, I was unconscious. The coffee cup had slipped from my hands and rolled beneath the bench. My head rested awkwardly against the plastic seat. My soaked coat clung to my shoulders. Ethan stood there for several seconds studying me. At least that is what I was told later. Long enough for concern to replace curiosity. Long enough to realize something was wrong. He crouched beside me and said my name. Claire. Quietly, as if testing whether it still belonged to me. No response. He said it again. Still nothing. One of his security men suggested calling an ambulance. Ethan shook his head. Then he removed his coat and draped it over me. The gesture shocked everyone who witnessed it. Men like Ethan Moretti did not take off $1,000 coats for strangers. Yet he did it without hesitation. Within minutes, I was being carried through the rain toward one of the waiting vehicles. Warm leather seats. Heated air. Soft lighting. The city blurred beyond tinted glass as the SUV pulled away from the station. And somewhere between exhaustion and sleep, completely unaware of what was happening, I left behind the loneliest night of my life while unknowingly entering the most complicated chapter of it. The first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes was the ceiling. White. Smooth. Expensive. Definitely not the stained tiles of my old apartment, and definitely not a hospital emergency room. For several seconds, I simply stared upward, trying to understand where I was. The sheets beneath me felt impossibly soft. The air smelled faintly of fresh linen and something clean and expensive I could not identify. My head felt heavy. My body felt even heavier. Then panic arrived. I sat up too quickly. The room tilted. A wave of dizziness forced me back against the pillows. My pulse raced as I scanned my surroundings. Large windows overlooked the city skyline. A leather chair sat near the corner. Medical equipment rested discreetly against one wall. Nothing looked threatening. Somehow that made me even more nervous. Because places this nice did not belong in my world. The door opened before I could gather my thoughts. A nurse entered carrying a tablet. Relief flashed across her face when she saw me awake. "Good morning, Miss Bennett." Her voice was warm. Professional. "You gave everyone quite a scare." I swallowed. My throat felt dry. Where am I? A private medical suite. That answer only created more questions. How did I get here? The nurse hesitated. Just long enough for me to notice. Then she smiled politely. "Someone brought you in after finding you unresponsive." Someone. Before I could ask another question, the door opened again. The atmosphere changed instantly. It was subtle, almost impossible to explain. Yet everyone in the room seemed to straighten automatically. The nurse stepped aside, and Ethan Moretti walked in. He wore a charcoal suit without a single wrinkle. His dark hair looked perfectly arranged despite the early hour. The city skyline behind him somehow made him appear even taller. More imposing. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Those gray eyes studied me carefully, as if confirming I was actually awake. As if he had been waiting for this exact moment. Then the nurse quietly excused herself, leaving us alone. Silence stretched between us. I had seen Ethan before. Charity events. Fundraisers. Once at a library board meeting where he had donated enough money to keep 3 neighborhood branches open. We were not friends. We barely knew each other, which made what happened next even stranger. Ethan took 2 slow steps toward the bed. His jaw tightened. Something flashed across his face. Relief. Frustration. Fear. I could not tell. Then he spoke. "Why did you not call me?" The question hit harder than I expected. I blinked, certain I had misunderstood. "What?" His eyes never left mine. "Why did you not call me, Claire?" His voice remained calm, controlled. But beneath that control lived something deeper. Something emotional. "You were sitting alone in that station, barely conscious." I stared at him, completely confused. I did not think I should. The answer sounded pathetic the moment it left my mouth. Ethan looked away briefly. One hand moved to his pocket. The gesture seemed uncharacteristically restless. "You had my number." "Yes. And you chose not to use it." I lowered my eyes. The truth felt embarrassing now. I did not think anyone would come. The room became very quiet. Ethan stopped moving entirely. When I finally looked up again, something had changed in his expression. The anger was gone. In its place sat something far more dangerous. Genuine concern. And for the first time since waking up, I realized he was not upset because I had inconvenienced him. He was upset because he had been worried. After Ethan left the room, I spent the next hour staring out at the skyline. trying to convince myself that none of this was real. People like him did not worry about people like me. They certainly did not bring them to private medical suites overlooking half the city. Yet every detail around me said otherwise. The nurse returned with breakfast that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Fresh fruit, eggs, toast still warm from the kitchen. I managed a few bites before exhaustion settled over me again. Around noon, another visitor arrived. Not Ethan. A woman in a navy business suit carrying a tablet and several folders. She introduced herself as Olivia, one of Ethan's executive assistants. Her smile was professional but kind. I need your signature on a few documents. Immediately, my stomach tightened. What kind of documents? Olivia seemed surprised by the question. She opened the folder and turned it toward me. Hospital invoices, payment confirmations, medical evaluations. Every balance listed showed the same thing. Paid in full. My heart skipped. There must be some mistake. Olivia shook her head. There is no mistake. I stared at the numbers. They were far beyond anything I could afford. Weeks of wages. Maybe months. My chest felt tight again. I cannot accept this. Olivia typed something into her tablet. You already have. I never agreed to it. Mr. Moretti did not ask for permission. Somehow that answer irritated me more than it should have. By late afternoon, I was discharged. A driver waited downstairs. Another surprise. I insisted on taking a cab. The driver politely informed me that my cab had already been paid for. I took the ride anyway because I was too exhausted to argue with invisible arrangements being made around me. The moment I reached my apartment building, something felt different. The flickering hallway light that had been broken for 3 months suddenly worked. The overflowing trash near the entrance was gone. Even the cracked security door downstairs had been repaired. I stood there staring, confused, suspicious. The elderly landlord spotted me from across the lobby. Good news, Claire. He smiled. Looks like somebody finally paid for all the maintenance requests. My stomach dropped. Somebody. He nodded. Anonymous donor. Of course. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor feeling increasingly unsettled. Inside my apartment, another surprise waited. The refrigerator that had stopped working 2 weeks earlier had been replaced. Fresh groceries filled the shelves. Milk, bread, fruit, soup. Things I had quietly stopped buying because rent always came first. I closed the refrigerator door and stood perfectly still. My phone buzzed. One message. Ethan. Just 4 words. Hope you got home. I stared at the screen for nearly a minute before typing a reply, then deleting it, then typing another. Finally, frustration won. My fingers moved across the keyboard. Stop trying to fix my life. The response arrived less than 30 seconds later. I am not fixing your life. I am making sure you have one. For the next 3 days, Ethan Moretti became impossible to ignore. Not because he showed up at my apartment. Not because he called every hour. In fact, he barely contacted me at all. That was what made it worse. His presence lingered in the background of my life like a shadow I could never quite catch. Every morning, groceries appeared at my door before sunrise. Fresh fruit, coffee beans from a local roaster. Things I had mentioned exactly once in casual conversations months ago. Somehow he remembered. Every afternoon, my phone buzzed with messages from unknown numbers offering job opportunities, freelance projects, and interviews. Better positions, better pay, better benefits, opportunities that seemed suspiciously perfect. I ignored all of them, at least at first. Then Friday arrived. My manager at the library asked to speak with me before closing. I assumed it was about reduced hours again. Instead, she handed me a letter. A grant approval. Enough funding to restore full staffing for the entire year. I stared at the paperwork in disbelief. The library had spent months fighting for that funding. Suddenly, it appeared overnight. Do you know where it came from? I asked. My manager smiled. Anonymous donor. Of course. That evening I finally lost my patience. I sent Ethan a message. One sentence. Stop interfering in my life. His reply arrived 5 minutes later. Then stop making survival look so difficult. I stared at the screen. Anger bubbled inside me. Not because he was wrong. Because part of me feared he was right. The truth was that survival had become difficult. Much harder than I ever admitted aloud. My parents died when I was 22. A distracted driver. A rainy highway. One phone call that split my life into before and after. The following years disappeared beneath responsibilities. Bills. Work. Grief. Then came Daniel. The man who promised forever. The man who spent 3 years convincing me I finally mattered to someone. Until he decided building a future with me required more effort than he wanted to give. After he left, I stopped expecting people to stay. It hurt less that way. Less disappointment. Less hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope made you trust people. Hope made you believe rescue was possible. I learned not to rely on either. Yet Ethan kept challenging that belief without even trying. Saturday afternoon brought another surprise. I arrived at the library to discover a new children's reading area under construction. Bright shelves, fresh paint, comfortable chairs. The exact renovation proposal we had spent years trying to fund. My coworker Emily nearly cried when she saw it. Everyone celebrated. Everyone except me. Because I already knew who was responsible. That night I stood beside my apartment window watching rain slide down the glass. The city lights shimmered beyond the storm. My phone rested in my hand. Ethan's contact remained open on the screen. Finally, I typed the question that had been haunting me for days. Why are you doing all this? The answer took longer this time. Nearly 10 minutes. Then his message appeared. 3 simple words. Because nobody did. I read them again. And again. Suddenly the room felt very quiet. Because for the first time, I realized Ethan was not trying to save me from my future. He was trying to protect me from a loneliness he understood far too well. The message stayed on my screen long after midnight. Because nobody did. 3 words. Simple words. Yet they followed me everywhere for the next week. At work. On the subway. Standing in line at the grocery store. I kept hearing them in Ethan's voice even though I had only read them. The strange thing was that after that conversation, he stopped trying to help. No surprise deliveries. No mysterious repairs. No anonymous donations appearing out of nowhere. It was as if he had sensed he had pushed far enough. Life settled into something that almost felt normal again. Almost. Then Tuesday happened. The library closed at 7. A steady drizzle had fallen since late afternoon, coating the streets in reflections of yellow traffic lights and neon storefront signs. I pulled my coat tighter and started the 6-block walk toward my apartment. The air smelled like wet pavement and coming winter. My thoughts drifted toward nothing important. Books that needed shelving. Bills due next week. Whether I could afford to replace my worn-out shoes before the first snowfall. Ordinary worries. Familiar worries. The kind that filled empty spaces. Halfway home, my phone buzzed. A text from Emily asking about a weekend volunteer event. I slowed near a crosswalk to answer. By the time I looked up again, I realized I had wandered farther than usual. The street felt quieter. Less crowded. Not dangerous. Just empty. For some reason, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I could not explain it. I quickened my pace. Rain tapped softly against my umbrella. The feeling stayed. By the time I reached my building, my pulse was racing for no reason at all. I laughed at myself while unlocking the front door. Exhaustion. Stress. That was all. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and headed for the kitchen. Then I froze. A light was on. Not inside my apartment. Across the street. On the rooftop of a neighboring building. Someone stood there. Watching. The figure was too far away to identify. The moment I noticed, they turned and disappeared from view. A chill crawled down my spine. I stepped back from the window immediately. My phone rang. The sudden sound nearly made me drop it. Ethan. I stared at the screen before answering. Hello. Silence for half a second. Then his voice. Calm. Controlled. Close your curtains. Every muscle in my body locked. What? Close the curtains, Claire. I moved without thinking. The fabric slid shut across the glass. My heart hammered so loudly I could hear it. Ethan, what is going on? Another pause. Longer this time. I need you to listen carefully. Something about his tone erased every trace of resistance I had left. This was not the confident businessman from charity events. This was the man who commanded entire rooms with a single glance. Pack a bag, he said quietly. Only essentials. Fear tightened around my chest. Why? For the first time since I had met him, Ethan sounded tired. Not physically tired. Emotionally tired. Like someone carrying a burden alone for too long. Because, he said softly, I think someone has started paying attention to you. My hands shook as I pulled a small duffel bag from the closet. A few changes of clothes. My phone charger. A framed photograph of my parents that had survived 3 apartments and 1 broken engagement. The essentials. Exactly like Ethan had instructed. 30 minutes later, headlights swept across my living room ceiling. I looked through the narrow gap between the curtains and saw a black SUV waiting below. Rain still fell steadily, turning the street into a river of reflected lights. My phone buzzed. A single message. I am outside. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. Every sound echoed. Every stranger seemed suspicious. By the time I reached the lobby, my pulse was racing again. The SUV door opened before I reached it. Ethan stepped out. He was not wearing a suit this time. Dark jeans, black jacket, no tie. Somehow that made him seem more dangerous and more human at the same time. His eyes scanned the street before settling on me. Relief crossed his face so quickly I almost missed it. He took my bag without asking and opened the passenger door. Get in. I wanted answers. Demanded answers, actually. But something in his expression stopped me. Whatever was happening, he was taking it seriously. The drive lasted nearly 40 minutes. Neither of us spoke much. Rain tapped softly against the windows while city lights gradually disappeared behind us. Eventually, iron gates appeared ahead. They opened automatically. Beyond them sat the largest private estate I had ever seen. The house was less a home and more a small fortress built from stone and glass. Warm lights glowed through massive windows. Trees lined a long circular driveway. Security cameras watched every angle. I stared in disbelief. Ethan noticed. You are safe here. Safe. The word landed differently than it once had. Inside, the house felt unexpectedly comfortable. Not cold. Not intimidating. Bookshelves covered entire walls. A piano stood near a fireplace. Family photographs sat on tables. Evidence of a life rather than just wealth. A woman named Maria showed me to a guest suite larger than my apartment. Fresh towels waited on the bed. New clothes hung inside the closet. Once again, Ethan had anticipated everything. After Maria left, I found him standing alone on a balcony overlooking the property. The rain had finally stopped. Mist drifted across the distant hills. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that had been building all evening. Who is watching me? Ethan's jaw tightened. I do not know yet. That is not reassuring. It is honest. I looked away. You could have told me sooner. His expression darkened slightly. Would you have listened? The answer arrived before I could stop it. Probably not. A faint smile touched his lips. The first real smile I had ever seen from him. It changed his entire face. Made him look younger somehow. Less like a man carrying the weight of an empire on his shoulders. Silence settled between us again. Comfortable this time. Then Ethan spoke so quietly I almost missed it. You are not alone anymore, Claire. I looked at him beneath the soft glow of the balcony lights and felt something shift deep inside me. For the first time in years, I believed him. The estate settled into a rhythm over the next several days. Mornings began with coffee on the terrace overlooking rolling hills wrapped in mist. Afternoons disappeared inside the enormous library where I discovered Ethan owned more books than most public institutions. Evenings often ended with quiet dinners where conversations drifted from business to childhood memories to favorite novels. For the first time in years, I felt something dangerous returning to my life. Peace. That should have made me happy. Instead, it terrified me. Because peace meant I had something to lose again. One afternoon, I found Ethan standing alone in his office staring at a city map spread across a conference table. Several locations had been marked in red. His expression looked darker than usual. More focused. More distant. He quickly folded the map when he noticed me. Bad day? I asked. A faint smile appeared. Nothing you need to worry about. I had heard that answer before. People always said it right before something became everyone else's problem. That evening, during dinner, his phone rang 3 times. He ignored every call. The 4th time, he finally answered. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Yet when he returned to the dining room, something had changed. The warmth in his eyes remained, but tension had settled beneath it. I need to leave for a few hours, he said. Work. I nodded. You do know normal people are allowed to take days off. A genuine laugh escaped him. I will remember that. He left shortly afterward. The house felt strangely empty without him. Larger somehow. Colder. I spent the evening reading beside the fireplace until exhaustion finally pulled me toward bed. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. At first I ignored it. Then another message arrived. And another. Curiosity won. I opened the first one. There was no text. Only a photograph. My apartment building. The second image showed the library where I worked. The third showed me leaving a grocery store weeks earlier. My blood turned to ice. Someone had been watching me. Not recently. For a long time. My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. Another message appeared. This time there were words. Stay away from him. Fear surged through me. Sharp. Immediate. Every instinct screamed for me to call Ethan. Yet another part of me hesitated. He already carried enough responsibility. Enough pressure. Enough danger. Maybe I could handle this myself. Maybe I could simply leave. Disappear before my presence created more problems for him. By dawn I had made a decision. A terrible decision. One I believed was protecting him. I packed my bag quietly. Wrote a short note. Thank you for everything. I am sorry. Then I slipped out of the estate before sunrise. 2 hours later, Ethan returned from an all-night meeting. Maria found the note first. According to everyone who witnessed it, the color drained from his face the moment he read my handwriting. He asked only one question. When did she leave? And for the first time in years, the most powerful man in the city looked afraid. The bus station was nearly empty when I finally stopped running. Rain tapped softly against the glass roof overhead while travelers moved past without noticing the woman sitting alone on a hard plastic bench, clutching a duffel bag and questioning every decision she had made in the last 24 hours. My phone remained turned off. I told myself it was for Ethan's sake. If people were watching me because of him, then leaving was the right thing to do. At least that was the lie I kept repeating. The truth was much harder. I was afraid. Afraid of caring. Afraid of depending on someone. Afraid of losing another person who mattered. Hours passed. The station gradually filled with the pale light of morning. Exhaustion settled into my bones. Then a familiar sound echoed through the terminal. Footsteps. Calm. Deliberate. Certain. I looked up. Ethan stood 20 feet away. His dark coat was damp from the rain. His hair was slightly disheveled. For the first time since I had known him, he looked completely unconcerned with appearances. He only looked at me. Relief flooded his face so openly that my chest hurt. Neither of us moved for several seconds. Then he crossed the distance between us. You left. His voice was quiet. Not angry. Just tired. I lowered my eyes. I thought it was the safest thing. Ethan knelt in front of me, so I had no choice but to meet his gaze. For who? I did not have an answer. He exhaled slowly and sat beside me on the bench. The silence stretched between us. Comfortable. Honest. Real. Finally, he pulled out his phone and handed it to me. On the screen was a report from his security team. The messages had been traced. The photographs had been traced. It had been the work of a private investigator hired months earlier by a former business rival looking for information. Nothing more. No immediate threat. No danger following me. The fear that had driven me away suddenly collapsed beneath its own weight. I felt foolish. Embarrassed. Relieved. I am sorry, I whispered. Ethan looked out at the rain for a moment before answering. Claire, do you know what scared me? I shook my head. Not the messages. Not the photographs. His eyes found mine again. Losing you. The words stole the air from my lungs. This man who commanded respect from everyone around him. This man who never seemed uncertain about anything. He was looking at me like I was the one thing in his life he could not control. You should have called me, he said softly. Tears blurred my vision. I know. He reached for my hand. Not possessive. Not demanding. Just steady. Warm. Present. Then call me now. A laugh escaped through my tears. You were sitting right here. A rare smile appeared. Humor me. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and switched it on. His contact appeared instantly. Ethan Moretti. I pressed call. One ring. Then he answered, even though he sat inches away. Hello, Claire. I smiled for the first time in days. Can you come get me? His expression softened completely. Always. 6 months later, the library reopened its newly renovated community center. Children filled the reading rooms. Families crowded the hallways. Hope lived in every corner. Ethan stood beside me during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, his hand resting comfortably in mine. Life was not perfect. It never would be. But for the first time in a very long time, I was no longer facing it alone. And looking back now, I sometimes think the night I sat exhausted and forgotten in that bus station was not the end of my story at all. It was the moment everything finally began.